Hey, how's it going, everyone? Before we get started into this next episode, I want to give a shout out to a continued supporter of the podcast, being Seth Roy of North Mountain Goshawks. If you're in the market for a new goshawks, a hunting partner for the upcoming season, particularly a parent-reared North American, Finnish, or Russian goshawk, Seth's the guy you should definitely hit up. He produces some great game hawks, and pretty much everyone that I know that has flown a bird that's been produced by Seth has been extremely happy. So if you want to get on the list, hit him up at ostringer3@gmail.com. Fill out the information form on the homepage of northmountaingoshawks.com, or send him a message at North Mountain Goshawks on Facebook and let him know that we sent you. I also want to give a quick shout out to Brett Reese of Devils of Dirt Hawking, and if any of you aren't familiar with his work, head to devilsofdirthawking.com, throw him some support, get some shirts or whatever merch that you feel like you want to get. He produces some really cool designs and did a really good job on the new logos and some of the new rebranding stuff for the podcast here. So very appreciative of his work, and definitely is a guy that you should support. So head to devilsofdirthawking.com, pick you up some merch, and support what he does. And now, on to this next episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast.
One of the things about gyrfalcons is that they love to chase. They will. They can be up high enough where it looks like they can cut a grouse in half, and they come in and tap them on the back, and then lock in behind them and chase until the grouse puts into cover. And these are typically ephemeral draws that have water part of the year, but have additional moisture and food resources for the sage. And there's tall sage, and the grouse go into those. And so the falcon's right behind it. And in the winter, when there's snow on the ground, there's nothing else moving out there. You know, the eagles are watching all day long. That's all they do.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast. I hope you all had a great Christmas or whatever holiday you choose to celebrate, and are getting ready to have a wonderful, happy new year. I appreciate you all sticking with me. It's hard to believe here in a few weeks it'll officially be about a year since the branding transition and going out on my own and joining the Extreme Performance Outdoor Network. And I really have been happy with the continued support and new support that a lot of you have been giving. So I'm very appreciative of that, and hope you all are doing well and your seasons are going great. So this episode, we're continuing on in Wyoming, and this time we're in Pinedale visiting with John Dahlke, and we're talking sage grouse, lots of conservation type stuff, and different aspects of sage grouse hawking as well. And we're also going to talk a lot about gyrfalcons and other good stuff. So stick around, enjoy, and there's lots more good stuff coming at you from Wyoming in the coming weeks. So here we go. Really appreciate you having me out. You know, it's luckily it's been a nice day. I haven't had to worry about actually driving through any blizzards or anything to get up this far, and so at least that was nice. You know, I mean, it was nice being able to have a pleasant. Of course, there's always the Wyoming winds. You know, you got to drive through, but yeah. So, remind me again? What were you down in Rock Springs for today earlier? I
currently employed as a hydraulist for the state of Wyoming, and every year we have a training session in the spring, and one of our duties is to monitor the stream flows on all the mountain ranges and all the streams. So this is my second favorite job I've ever had. The state gave me a pickup and a four-wheeler and a gas card, and said, go figure out what's happening on the upper green.
Sounds like there's worse jobs you can have. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's I've had the opportunity in my life to travel all over the continent, and this is absolutely one of my favorite places. And then this morning we were doing what's called levels training, because on each of the stream gauging stations we have, there are we take the levels of the height of the stream, and through a bunch of math and measurements, we determine the amount of water that's going by. And with freeze-thaw cycles and cattle and moose pushing on things. Sometimes things get moved a little bit. So we have to go through pretty stringent survey techniques to within 0.02 of an inch to make sure that our records are accurate.
That precise, huh?
Yeah. Wyoming water for irrigation is an enormous part of Wyoming agriculture, both in crop growing and here in the Upper Green for raising cattle. And, of course, people too. And now this is the focal point for the drought on the Colorado River. So we're looking at long-term plans, 2-year, 4-year plans, 20-year plans, how to do more with less. And one of my charges, one of my duties is to make sure that every measurement I take of water is well documented and will stand up in court. Because it's there will be a time when these records are scrutinized to look for mistakes.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like it's a really cool, scenic, and very nature-esque kind of job. So relaxing on one hand, but that sounds kind of stressful a little bit on the other hand.
Some, but I've been around one type of science all my life, and I'm used to doing good documentation. One of my mentors after I moved here was Luna Leopold, who was Aldo Leopold's son, and he made his name in hydrology. And he once told me, with dealing with graduate students and with other people, that unless you have good notes, it did not happen.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like in the healthcare profession, like we were just talking about a little bit ago. So if you didn't chart it, it didn't happen. Same kind of principle. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so remind me again how long you've actually been out here, like specific to Pinedale.
Pinedale had been about 25 years.
Okay. And you said you traveled a lot for work and everything else before that.
Yeah, well, to start off, I guess, with my falconry and growing up, I was raised in the second largest state park in Missouri, in the Ozark foothills or Ozark Mountains, and got my first red tail at 12 years old. There was nobody else around. It was an imprint red tail, and I had about 20 pages in an encyclopedia that I was going on. And I flew this imprint red tail on a creance for over a year, and he never went anywhere. But then I got started flying squirrels and stuff, gray squirrels, because where I lived was a dense forest, hardly any rabbits, and so I had wonderful flights on squirrels, real aerial stuff. And then in 1969, when I was a freshman in high school, I found Cooper's hawks, and at the time, they were considered extinct as a breeding species in Missouri. And that was right at the height, or the nadir, of the DDT era, and things were just about gone. And I flew several of those birds through high school, and as far as I know, I was the first person to take an eye Cooper's hawk in Missouri. There were very few falconers around. Henry Kendall was in St. Louis, and I never met him, but he had, as I recall, a couple peregrines and an albino red tail or something, but I never met him. And so I was just kind of winging it on my own. And, I had outdoorsy jobs, river guide, that kind of thing. And then went to college at the University of Montana in Missoula. And that was like an explosion of everything. The first few days I was there, I met the guys that were there just a couple years ahead of me in school, friends that are still lifelong friends and have become icons in North American falconry, like Pete Widener, Peter Jenny, Derek Craighead, Carter Montgomery, Gerald Geiger, all these guys. And I went from having, being the star on the small block, the big fish in a little pond with a Cooper's hawk, to these guys. I walked in the room and there's 4 or 5 peregrines and a couple of gyrfalcons, and it just was a whole new world.
I bet. Bet. Well, and I'm sure that there was at least, I don't want to necessarily use the term, well, I guess it could use the term culture shock, but I mean, I'm sure it was, well, I mean, Montana's a lot different than Missouri.
Oh yeah, and for the first time in my life, I saw that there were other people that had my interests, because I was the outcast in high school. Nobody else was into this kind of stuff, and then plopped right into the wildlife biology program, surrounded by 300 or 400 other people that were with the same sincere interest. But as I soon came to find out, my upbringing in the state park, where I had every kind of wild pet imaginable, was unusual. There were lots of other people with deeply sincere interest in wildlife, but they were from Connecticut or Chicago or who knows where, and their interest was off of Wild Kingdom, the old Wild Kingdom show. And coincidentally, that guy, Marlon Perkins, lived not far from where I lived, and I met him in high school, and that started another track. But it was absolutely a culture shock to go to the middle of the mountains and find other people with similar interests.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's great though. I mean, that's part of why, I guess I've said it many times before. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people still enjoy falconry and get into falconry, though, is, at least nowadays anyway, of course, it's much easier to reach each other now than it was, back in those days. But I mean, there's a lot of friendships and a lot of the social aspect of it, and a big reason why people do it. And I'm sure it was like I said, a relief to know that there were other people that, like yourself, that were pursuing something that you thought you were the only person like doing it there for a while.
Yeah, and it was the beginning of the Peregrine Fund. Just when people were starting to think about breeding peregrines, within 10 days of moving to Missoula, I was working for John Craighead. His son Derek had accumulated several golden eagles through the years. He and Jay Sumner and Jerry McGann had all done graduate work on golden eagles, and when they were working, eagles weren't protected. You could shoot them. And so I showed up not long after Derek had moved to Alaska, and there was 9 golden eagles there, and Dr. Craighead needed somebody to work with him, and so I jumped right in, and also worked for him for various things, and spent a lot of time with him and his family. They taught me how to kayak, float the big rivers and rafts and stuff, and that was really the formal beginning of what I have come to view as my niche, in that I was combining the falconry and some form of science. Because Dr. Craighead was very strict about keeping notes, about doing things in a logical manner, and being very careful also with how you care for your birds. And I was able to turn around the project from over a decade of nothing and or no production, and by changing the diet of the birds and also providing progressive nesting materials, got them to breed. And by what I mean about the nesting materials, that I would give them medium-sized sticks or already broken into appropriate lengths, so it's easy for the eagles to carry them. And as they built the nest structure with that, they were in big aviaries, most of them. And then I graduate to smaller sticks, and then dry grass for them to line the nest cup. And then right when I thought that they should be laying eggs, I provided fresh green pine boughs. And all those small things helped to bring off 2 pairs that were successful where they hadn't been for many years. And then there were some other birds around that I flew that were fabulous falconry birds, or exhibited fabulous falconry characteristics and flights, from a speck, sometimes spiraling down like a bullet down to your fist. So it was pretty dramatic stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that was really cool also, like, getting to kind of, I don't know, learn a lot from, people like that. I mean, especially like someone like John Craighead, I mean, like that's, someone that's definitely, known as someone that's been very influential in falconry, obviously. So it's, I mean, getting to learn from a family like that and, people like that, and going from, once again, emphasizing such a kind of a small personal world, and, thinking that you were, as you so aptly put it, like one of these only fish in this pond that was, doing this, to going and finding out that these other people exist and getting to learn from, and in turn getting to learn from them. I mean, I'm sure that was pretty amazing.
It really was. And John was, of course, world renowned for lots of different things. And what he considered his most important work was on grizzly bears and the Wild and Scenic River Act. And so he was so confident in his own self that there was never any kind of he never felt threatened or anything, and he was supremely open to whatever I wanted to do. And as I said, the Peregrine Fund was just getting going at that time, and he wanted to kind of parallel some of the research on how to produce and release golden eagles. So after we produced several birds, I took some over to the eastern front of the Rocky Mountains around Shoto, and released some in different techniques. One bird that was my favorite bird of all time. It was a young bird that I was actually laying on the nest with the adult female when she laid the egg, and then we was actually there when the chick pipped and I helped it roll out of the egg. And coming now, I realized it was probably a misprint, but he was a really nice eagle, so I took him over there and over to the eastern front in August and stayed and flew him, and he eventually took off in October on my birthday, actually. And I looked for him for 2 days with aircraft, and he was just gone. And he showed up 3 years later, hit on a power line in Wyoming. So that was a small success there.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that's, I can, like I said, dealing with all these different aspects of kind of how you so aptly put it earlier, this is mixing, your falconry and then the scientific aspect of things. And, I'm sure it was probably, even though it was kind of a small victory, as you said, it's probably pretty rewarding to at least see, something that you were doing in regards to, being able to mix kind of what you're doing with falconry, and then, having these birds that you were trying to release and everything else. Like I'm sure, like I said, there's probably a very rewarding aspect to that.
It was, and it was a rapid change from the hillbilly Cooper's Hawk redtail stuff
to golden eagles.
To golden eagles with the top of the line scientists and falconers and stuff, and that really, I guess, set the tone for the way I view myself as one of the, I've seen several times as falconer scientists, and I'm absolutely confident that my experiences with falconry have helped me immensely in biology.
Well, I bet. And, I'm sure that in turn, I'm sure it's kind of a symbiotic type of thing, because, but we'll get into a little bit more of, kind of your other, science-based approach to, like the sage grouse aspect of things and stuff here shortly. But, I am curious though, at what point did you decide to, as far as like actually flying birds and falconry, at what point did you start flying species like, some of these bigger falcons, gyrs, peregrines and stuff? Is it mainly just gyrs that you flew?
I've flown most of the North American birds at one time or another. Through my 20s and 30s, I had a wonderful series of jobs where I traveled and did mostly raptor work. Looked for peregrines all over the northern Rockies. Worked in Alaska one summer, 1980, actually, as part of the North American Peregrine Survey, where I worked on the porcupine, the Yukon, and 5 rivers in the National Arctic Wildlife Refuge. And it was always kind of a blend. I flew mostly passage birds because I was often working someplace during the summer, and I could pick up a passage prairie or a goshawk and fly it through the winter and let it go in the spring. Mm-hmm. And with most of the work I did, I would say probably half of them I worked, responded to some kind of a job that I knew about, or the other half, I came up with an idea and contracted it and funded it and got it done. I did after I was in school for 2 years in Missoula, and was the student curator of the Vertebrate Museum there. When I was in high school, I had a little taxidermy business, and mostly what I did as a student curator was a fancy name for a preparator where I make study skins and stuff. But I was helping a lot of grad students do their labs and stuff and prepare things, and I got to talking to them and all their projects. I said, I can do this. So I wrote a project proposal to the Missouri Game and Fish after I'd been to school in 2 years, and went back to Missouri and did a baseline inventory on Cooper's hawks. And actually, when that was winding up, the guy Marlon Perkins from Wild Kingdom that I knew contacted me, and the other guy on Wild Kingdom, Jim Fowler, the big tall guy that always jumped on everything. He was a falconer too, and had brought had 2 harpy eagles that he brought back from Guyana, and he'd had them for many years, and he wanted to release them back in their native jungle, and he was looking for somebody that had falconry experience and video experience, which I had working for Dr. Craighead, and we were set to go to Guyana, so I worked for him for almost a year, flying these 2 harpy eagles that were just unbelievable. They were like a goshawk, bigger than a golden eagle, slipping through the trees. Mm-hmm. And one of the neat things about them is that since they are a jungle species, they don't rely very much on aerial displays. Most of their territory and their communication with their mate is through a very wide repertoire of vocalizations. And I got where I could, when I was doing something else on Jim's place, they would see me or hear something, and they would whistle, in a particular way, and I would whistle back, and it was pretty cool to be communicating with these big birds.
I bet. No, I mean that's neat. Like I said, I mean it's really neat that you got a chance to do so many different things, with like such a kind of a narrow background and going into this much bigger world. I mean, I'm sure that it was really cool, somewhat overwhelming, I'm sure. But I mean, as far as, like I said, I going back to, my probably poorly worded question just a little bit ago, like when exactly was it though that you started to fly, bigger falcons like gyrs, peregrines, or whatever? When did you make the transition from like the world of accipiters and just like, flying some of these other birds and like falconry specific, not just, working in research or biology, but like as it applies to your personal falconry? I mean, what point did you kind of make more of the switch to like the long wings and other, types of birds?
Pretty much when I moved to Montana.
It was a pretty instant switch then?
Yeah.
Okay.
After that, I had a few goshawks because they fit into the situation I was in. For several years, or 3 years, I guess, I lived out in Glendive in very eastern Montana and trapped my first gyrfalcon in the field across from my house. And that's when I really saw that these gyrfalcons were different than anything else, were much more closely aligned intellectually to a golden eagle than the other raptors I'd worked with. And I've flown a few peregrines, several hybrids, but once I got to see the men that I mentioned before with mostly setters and peregrines and gyrfalcons, it was no turning back then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny whenever you kind of get a chance to, whenever you start getting into whatever aspect of falconry that not really sure if it's going to be your niche or not, but once you get into it, you instantly it's like a light bulb goes on. It's just like, this is what I, want to like maintain my focus on from here on out. It's nice whenever that moment kind of hits.
I agree, but as with most of my life up until I moved up to here to Pinedale, I was really flexible. While I had a series of, looking back on it now, kind of almost unbelievable job opportunities, they typically did not follow one after another. So especially in my 20s and early 30s, I did a lot of different things. I was an offshore fisherman and painted radio towers and restored horse-drawn carriages and sleighs and all kinds of different things. But, I was always looking for that next opportunity. And there was always kind of a hunger to get back into something like that. And these other things I did were just kind of to fill in. One of the things that I was able to do when I worked for Jim Fowler was that I'd worked there for about a week, and he had to go someplace. And he said, you should go down to the coast of Florida where I used to trap peregrines. And so I took a week off, and it was a big old barrier island, St. George Island, very similar to Assateague. And before I even stopped the truck, I saw a peregrine go by. And so spent a little time there then. Next year, when I went back to school, I got some, one of the, I worked through the Cooperative Wildlife Research Unit to do a small project down there on migrants. And then the next year, I had a banding station there. So it was, things kind of fell into place, but they didn't always go one after another. And there were times when money and vehicles were pretty short supply.
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like you were a touring musician without playing music.
That's pretty good comparison.
That's pretty funny.
But by the same token, I was always available to drop things and go for any opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I imagine, and like I said, it doesn't matter what field that it is. It doesn't matter if it's biology or research or music or whatever. I mean, whenever you don't have, something that's, a constant source of either provider for income or whatever, where job opportunities or whatever, you kind of have to be in a position where you have to be able to just kind of drop stuff at a drop of a dime, and because you never know when that next opportunity is gonna come. I mean, you never know when that next person is gonna pop up and say, okay, I'd really like this particular study done or this type of research done or whatever. You just never know where that's going to come from.
That's exactly correct. And for all those years, I never married and never had kids, so did not have that financial burden. But by the same token, I've never experienced the joys of having a family. But I remember camping with Jim Weaver one time many years ago, and he said, I never want to have more stuff than I can cram into my horse trailer. And, he wanted to be mobile. And so I was able to do that because all I needed to do is have room for my dog. Yeah. And, if I had a passage hawk, just cut it loose.
Yeah. And, there's a lot to be said. I mean, it's good to know kind of what your limitations are. And I think that there's unfortunately a lot of people that are kind of, I don't know, whether it's by one circumstance or another, end up feeling like they've got to force kind of, that square peg into a round hole sometimes. And, they want to have all these aspects of things incorporated into their life, but it doesn't always mesh very well together. And I mean, I can relate to that, for sure. I mean, I knew I wanted to have a family, but I've always wanted to have, at least one limb of foot, hand, whatever, in different aspects of different careers and hobbies and stuff that I knew wouldn't always be conducive to, being around and it'd always be family friendly too. So, I mean, it's always a struggle, and I totally get what you're saying. I mean, it's on one hand, it's kind of admirable. I mean, if there's plenty of people out there that don't ever want to get married or have kids, and that's totally fine, and I mean, at least you knew that, what you were doing wasn't going to necessarily be conducive to that aspect of life. I mean, I'm sure on one hand that was hard, but on the other hand, hey, you turned out fairly well. You've got a nice place out here, and you've got, cool stuff, and, I mean, so it doesn't really look like you're hurting too bad in other aspects of your life anyway. So,
well, thanks. That is a big change though from, the times of freedom I had in my 20s and 30s. And, partly I never had a family because I was moving around so much, and, I never felt that I was financially, solid enough to do that. Because there were times when money was unbelievably short. And in college, you get all these people just out on their own for the first time, all in one way or another similar to myself, where they were finally in a group that with all similar interests. And so there's lots of romantic liaisons, entanglements, whatever you want to call them. And then in the spring, joke always came around and said, I hope we can get a job in the same time zone, because you're looking for different jobs and you never know where that job may come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure there's probably some degree all these years later. I'm sure that there's probably some times where you kind of, in retrospect, look back and say, well, yeah, I didn't have a family, but like, well, now you're married to like a breeding project. And other aspects of things in your life. So while it wasn't a traditional marriage, there's still something that you're, somewhat having to have, continual dedication to and, maintain and things like that. So,
well, and I've been in a relationship now here in Pinedale for 20 years with a wonderful woman that has very similar aspirations and interests as I. And again, one of the few, there's only 7,000 people in this whole county. Mm-hmm. And she has a natural resource firm also, and only she's more engaged in making things happen on the legislative issue. And she works a lot on important thing here on big game migration corridors. And so she's achieved some great stuff. And so but she never had kids either, so we kind of, the two people in this county that were kind of similar, we found each other pretty quick.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Well, she was a librarian here in town. And when I first moved here, I had a contract in Idaho to work on improving a ranch for sharptails. And so I go into her and I'm asking her for interlibrary loan stuff on sharp-tailed grouse, and she kind of blinked and said, nobody's ever asked for anything like that. And she was, at the time, working with Wyoming Audubon to try to gain more protections for sage grouse. And so, we probably would have found each other anyway, but, the science was in seeking publications so I could base what I told this rancher on actual research instead of opinions. Mm-hmm. And so, we kind of instantly gravitated. So
bonded over grouse.
Yeah. And she's in Jackson tonight. I wasn't able to go because I had that meeting in Rock Springs, mm-hmm. But there's a famous ecologist speaking there tonight. And so she's up listening to that dude.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, I guess, and kind of circling back around again then, I guess now since, this would be a good segue into talking about some of that particular science and how you've incorporated that in, your hunting, for sage grouse and things like that. I know you've written a couple of articles that have been in American Falconry magazine, and then, of course, the NAFA, publications and stuff like that. Why don't you just talk about what your kind of approach was and how you went about getting that particular I don't know, like those particular sets of data, just your approach to how you went about getting all that, the science aspect of all that, and then, how in turn you decided you wanted to start incorporating that more into your falconry.
It was a very natural blend and progression. It was probably about 94 or something, or about 1990, I was living in Billings and moved to Sheridan, Wyoming to manage a hunting preserve. And did that for a few years and did a couple other things. As I mentioned, I restored horse-drawn carriages and sleighs there, which was really satisfying because all the carpentry work I've done various things, swung a hammer on houses and different things. But up until that time, my personal time, or my work time, was more or less evenly split between some kind of wildlife work and some kind of labor type work. I mentioned, painting radio towers or whatever it may be. And as I got to going on different things, there was a real dichotomy because when you do science, you generate a report, you generate information. And then you provide that, and you should be seen as a impartial observer that has impeccable credentials. But then you turn that information over to agencies, to various groups, whatever it may be, and then it's out of your hands, and you have no control over what they actually do with it. When you're working on carpentry stuff, you cut a board and it's either too long or short or it's just right. And at the end of the day, you see what you've done. And so it was that kind of blend of things. And when I was in Sheridan, the position as a hydrologist came open over there, so I jumped on it. And I'm not sure if I mentioned, but my degree from Missoula was wildlife biology with a minor in hydrology. And so that was a good fit. And then I did that for several years there, and 5 years to be exact. And then the position in Pinedale came open, and I jumped on it. Said I'd love to live in Pinedale with a job. So because I'd always, like everybody does, you look at maps and think, where would it be cool to live, and where could I live? And it depends on what you want. There's, a good grocery store, different things, there's things the amenities that you become used to that some of them you miss, some of them you don't, some of them are necessary. Like we don't have a hospital here in Pinedale. They're building one, but that's 3 years out, so you have to go to Rock Springs or Jackson or Idaho Falls. And so the opportunity to live here and be a hydrologist on this incredible place, the Upper Green, with a paycheck was great because my boss is over in Cokeville, which is like 200 miles away. I send them reports, they send me checks. So it's a great deal. But I vividly remember I moved here in October of 1998, and in November I was in the local diner and was reading the local paper, and some geologist wizard, had figured out how to literally crack the soft sandstone where these incredible natural gas deposits reside, and get it out. And it's called fracturing, which is now a common term. And I thought, this is the beginning of the end for sage grouse, because it's I don't know what the actual percentages are here, but most of the valley is public land, either BLM or Forest Service. And the only public lands or private lands really are along the water courses where people could meet the restrictions of the or requirements of the Homestead Act, where they would come in and claim land and then have to turn it into a producing crop of some kind. And so the BLM sagebrush that could not happen. And so it remained public land. And so vast chunks of sagebrush, which is the backbone of sage grouse habitat in North America. And so I moved here. I was just in heaven because I had big peels from Pete Widener and a hybrid from another guy. And I was the only guy around. Steve Chingren is 60 or 80 miles south of Farson, but, I hardly ever see him. And so it got, it was great. But my falconry career was in, or at least that part of it was in full swing then, because I was hawking hard with 2 big long wings most of the days of the week, 4 or 5 days a week. And just unbelievable country, and to go out on public land with no restrictions, very few fences, no power lines, and just see a dog flow over the sagebrush was something that was really satisfying to my soul, and something that you don't get to see that often, because in Sheridan especially, it's real rolly, and dogs and hawks can get out of sight real quick. And here, a dog can go out a half mile or more, and it's still in sight, and it still knows you're there and still working with you, but it's out there looking for grouse. And as things started to ramp up, within about 4 or 5 years, I was providing a lot of information to BLM, because nobody up here knew anything or cared anything about sage grouse. They were just out there. And the gas fields were starting, and I started subcontracting, or actually contracting with some of the gas fields or gas companies. First to do raptor surveys, and then started providing more and more information to the BLM and Game and Fish on documenting winter areas, using dogs to delineate winter ranges, finding leks. I found just over 40 leks, sage grouse leks here. And it was just, I was the local hands-on sage grouse expert. And it just fell into my lap because I was already here. But I had, the experience to take advantage of it, because I'd done multiple projects for other agencies and knew how to do the contracting, knew how to work within the systems and stuff. So it just blossomed into that. And after 5 years, I resigned from the state of Wyoming and went consulting full-time. And it was really fascinating to try to tease out the influences of energy development on sage grouse. And again, I was really the field guy that had the credentials, bachelor's credentials, not a master's or a doctorate, but soon became known in the Game and Fish and Fish and Wildlife circles that I did know what I was talking about with sage grouse. And then started doing more and more work, trying to do more research instead of field surveys. And then I was able to hire a guy named Matt Holleran the day after he did his thesis defense on sage grouse, and he was my business partner for 14 years up here. So between him with his doctorate and being able to design projects, we did a lot of great work. We did mostly in Wyoming, a few other states, but over the years we captured and put radio telemetry on over 2,500 female sage grouse. One year we caught over 400 individual birds. We had one project that was looking at winter distribution of sage grouse in relation to the active drilling rigs, and there were probably 75 drilling rigs out here at that time, and there's no trees, and so a big old drilling rig sticking up there, well lit, because the workers have to be safe and they work all night. It looked like a city out there. And as with so many things, the people that are doing the work and the disturbance and stuff say, well, what we're doing doesn't really have an effect. It's these other guys, what they're doing. But it's also the death of 1,000 cuts, where you can't look at one thing and say, there it is. with my work here, I served on a number of different groups. I helped develop the Wyoming statewide sage grouse plan. And then I'm a charter and continuing member of our local sage grouse working group. And we get money from the state legislature to fund on-the-ground projects. And I'm still doing that after 15 years. And we've done some good stuff. The thing that I view as my major accomplishment on that is that I was the lead on pushing for range management and vegetation management to reduce or prevent cheatgrass from invading this county, because at the time there was none. And cheatgrass is a annual plant that grows very fast in the spring, dries out, and is extremely flammable. And it outcompetes the native grasses. It's a grass from Eastern Europe and Russia, and its Latin name is Bromus tectorum, which means brome of the roof. And the places where it lived in Eastern Europe, when it was described in the 1700s, where its only niche that it could find in that moist environment was in the thatched roofs of houses. So it can survive with very little nutrition. And at first it was derided and said it'll never happen here. And then, but over the years, as we started seeing some of it, we were able through the group to gather more funds, and we've spent over $12 million here now to kind of hold the line against cheatgrass. And we have one of the most healthy sagebrush ecosystems left.
Very nice. Yeah. So I have to ask, I mean, whenever you're doing all your, field research and, looking for all these different leks and stuff like that, I mean, were you doing that while you were going out and hawking, or trying to go ahead and combine a couple of, just a couple interests, or
not on the same trip? Because when you're going out, and especially when you have employees or something, you've got a person with you, or you've got 2 or 3 crews of people out. You're focused on your job, and then same thing with falconry. You have to be focused on what you're doing. So typically, I would go hawking in the morning, and then have either meet my crew someplace or meet up back at the office in town, and then go out and do that. So it was the actual execution of both of those things was separate during the day, but they're inextricably entwined.
Yeah. Yeah. So in other words, that translates to you were sending your crew out and doing all the research stuff, and you went hawking.
Sort of. As time went on, I had them do more of the night trapping, because you trap sage grouse at night.
Yeah. And
it throws your daily rhythms all out of whack. Another thing that's hard is doing surveys for black-footed ferrets, because as most people know, ferrets were considered extinct. And then the last living ferret was actually seen just south of here, about 20 miles towards Rock Springs, right in the middle of the gas field. And then nothing was seen again. There were several sightings up here, then they kind of fizzled out. And then a few years after that, the ferrets were found again over at Meeteetse, Wyoming, a couple hundred miles away. And then that started the reintroduction program, captive breeding and everything. But just in case they were here, we had to do lots of ferret surveys. And ferrets are a nocturnal animal. And so you go out at night, and you stay out from dusk until dawn. And sometimes you'll go, each block of land you have to survey for 3 nights in a row. And sometimes you'd be out, some surveys were small, 3, 6, 9 nights. Some nights, in some projects, I'd have a crew of 20 people, which would be 10 crews out for a month. And when you're not used to that, it really messes with your with your daily rhythms. But right in the middle of the gas field, and Shell Oil was the biggest operator there, I found a ferret skull, and I just could not believe it. And I was positive of it because to be certified to do ferret surveys, you have to do a training course. And then just in case I found something, I bought some reference skulls of mink, badger, black-footed ferret, so I would have them on hand in case I ever found a fragment. And this was an absolutely perfect skull. It couldn't have been better. Every tooth was there. And so that caused an uproar pretty dang quick. And the Fish and Wildlife Service sent a special agent over to pick up this skull. And I'm not a forensic biologist by any stretch of the imagination, but this thing was pristine. But what they finally ended up saying was that in the dry soils of this area, that could have been buried for many years in a prairie dog burrow, and they just kicked it out. And I should back up just a hair and say I did find this on top of a prairie dog mound. And prairie dog mounds and burrows are used somewhat generationally, but there'll be an area that has prairie dogs in it. And one area will collapse in their burrow, then they'll dig a new one. So one of the techniques of looking for ferrets is to go out and look for exactly that, signs of digging and stuff. So I've always been suspicious if there was political pressure to say we're not going to stop anything, because at that time the gas prices were high. They've dropped dramatically now, but this was the most profitable gas field in North America. And there were thousands of wells out there. There still are. But a lot of these wells with this gas formation, all they had to do is poke a hole in it, which was deep, though, 3 to 5 miles deep. There are not that many drilling rigs that can reach that. But once you get it in there and get it completed, these wells were pumping out $1 million a month.
Jeez. And
so it'll always be a question in my mind, on whether there's actually ferrets out there or not.
Yeah, well, it's kind of hard to go up against $1 million a month, when it comes.
Yeah, especially when you got 1,000 of them.
Yeah, exactly. Man, that's a lot of money. A lot of money.
And then the gas prices dropped, and they found the new fields that are much more shallow. The Bakken field in western Montana, or in eastern Montana and North Dakota, the fields back in Pennsylvania. So they dropped, left here overnight.
Yeah, which
is the way gas energy companies do. And it's nothing against them; it's their business model. Because if they can drill and get gas for only going 20% of the depth, and it's on private land, so they don't have to deal with any really environmental controls, then they go to that. So,
yeah.
Kind of left Pinedale in a lurch, but it's nicer now because there was lots of bad characters and bad stuff that came with the gas fields, and now it's settled back to the normal stuff. I think there's probably 2,500 people now here in town.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, you got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. I mean, like I said, you're not going to compete against, millions and millions of dollars a month. You're just going to have, I mean, if that's coming into an area, then you're going to get what you're going to get probably. So, but, so I mean, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Like you said, how you were able to combine, a couple of different things. I'm sure like getting the ability to get, the firsthand knowledge of where all these different areas were that held grouse and everything. I'm sure that it was, it's been really nice, for, I mean, all these different aspects of your life, your job and your primary, passion and stuff to be able to have them working so well hand in hand together. And I mean, I am curious though, like at what point though did you decide that you wanted to start, breeding and like your own official, breeding project with these different falcons? And I mean, what point did you go kind of hot and heavy into that?
Well, again, it was kind of a gradual and natural progression. I've been into one form or another of animal husbandry all my life. As I mentioned, I grew up in a state park and had lots of wild pets. We had some banny chickens, and I saw in a nature encyclopedia the picture and description of an Indian jungle fowl, and which is the progenitor of our domestic chickens from Southeast Asia. And I thought, wow, some of our little chicks look just like these, and we've got one hen that looks like this wild chicken. So I started my own breeding project when I was about, 9 or 10 years old. And within a few years, they were breeding, and they looked just like jungle fowl. They look, the brown mottled stuff. They were beautiful. And I was out in the yard one day, and I was having red tails, and the red tail and Cooper's hawk out in the yard, and a game and fish truck went by, and they slammed on the brakes and backed up. And I thought it was somebody I didn't know. And he said, "Where'd you get those chickens?" I said, "I bred them." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I told him just what I told you. I said, over the years I've done this, and they're about half wild because they get most of their food from the woods here." And he said that you're the man I've been looking for. And that was the first time I think I'd ever been called a man, because I was like 12 or 8 or 9, something like that. And he said, "We are trying to reintroduce ruffed grouse to Missouri, and we've been looking for a way to do it. And what we want to do is collect eggs in Minnesota of ruffed grouse, bring them down here, and we want to see if you could put them under your chickens and essentially hack them out." He didn't say that, but that's what it was. And I said, "Sure." So for the next 3 years, they would fly eggs in, and we put them on the chickens. And then that was way before telemetry, of course. We put leg bands on them. And then the chickens would take them out in the woods, and they'd eventually just go off on their own. For the first month or two, they would be back in the chicken house every night with the mother, and then they'd start drifting away. And then so, that was a part of it. And then when I went to Missoula and started working for Dr. Craighead with the eagles, that was the breeding stuff right there. And it was really cool because it was not just just getting those birds to breed. It was also paralleling the peregrine fund and trying to figure out the techniques. And then so it just kind of locked in. And then when I was in Montana, I got a small project going with merlins. I was able to find a bunch of merlins in southeast Montana. And then when I moved to Sheridan, of course, that's a epicenter for breeding. And I'd known those guys for years. So it was really a natural progression. And then when I moved over here, I kept flying, big long wings, and it was just, I had the facilities, I had nice, I had the place to make facilities. I bought a wonderful house place here with a big equipment shed, and all I had to do was box in some bays. And the first year or two, it was just molting chambers. Then, I started getting birds from, Dan Conkle has been my primary source for gyrs all my life, other than the passive birds I got. And I was still buying birds and flying them from him, or buying from him and flying the birds. And I bought several because in addition to being the epicenter for sage grouse, there's lots and lots of golden eagles here. And over my career here, I've had 8 big longwings killed by eagles. And so I was a constant customer of Dan's. And then, so he started giving me some of the older birds, that they were working on his breeding project. Even though they were a little older, I thought, well, if they're good enough for Dan, they're good enough for me. And so it was, again, one of those things that kind of grew and blossomed. And I've been able to breed some great birds, but only because of the work that the people have done before me. I'm just standing on their shoulders and getting nice birds as I can. And it's a long road, and it's sometimes I wonder if I'd been just as well off to go into emu farming, because I got into, now I'm finally starting to produce some birds, and there's more gyrfalcons in the world than we need now. Although this last year, a beautiful female I sent over to Dubai just won a competition in Dubai, and so that's my first big win on the international stage. So we'll see if I can generate some more sales from that. But I sure don't have any birds sitting around. I've got some birds to some great falconers all over the United States, and never had a complaint. The people keep coming back. So it's, but the breeding, while it's a natural progression, is also very different from falconry, much more enlightening, because as a falconer, whatever bird I got, whether it's a captive bred gyr or a passage goshawk, that's the bird that you focus on. And then you get to know that individual bird, and you think, well, this is the way goshawks are. And it's a thing that is a constant problem for all biologists, and probably all hunters too, is that you see things and observe. If you're observant, you start putting things together, and then you think, well, I know about goshawks, or I know where to find a morel mushroom, or whatever it is, and you keep going back to those same places because that's what's locked in your mind. But as a breeder, you'll see 2 or 5 or 20 young birds in 1 year, and you compare them side by side, and it's really amazing the differences that you see between individuals that, as a breeder, that you would never see as a falconer. Because even if you do handle a lot of birds, it's 1 or 2 this year and then 1 or 2 next year. So it's not a side-by-side comparison.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, like I said, I've gotten a chance now to see several different breeding projects, and have gotten to know several different people that are pretty active with it. And it's amazing what all goes into it. And, I really respect people that have put forth the effort to maintain something like that, because it's a ton of work, and for really not as much reward, especially monetarily, as people think that it really is. So,
well, one thing that has helped me is that with a science background, I'm absolutely open to ideas, and I look to in my science, I look to literature, but with falconry, I looked mostly to visiting with friends that I've known for 40 years. And it's well known that gyrfalcons have or can have health issues, that they have trouble with their feet, all these different things. So I didn't need to rediscover that wheel. And so, for instance, in my chambers, I've got at least 5, and in some chambers more, different types of perch substrates. So every time a bird flies to a new perch or a different perch, it's under a different, his feet are coming in contact with something different.
Yeah, different pressure points each time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination of things. So I've been able to avoid things. I've never had a sick bird here. I've never had to imp a feather. It's both good fortune and taking advantage of what's known and avoiding it before it happens.
Yeah, I bet. And what's the most challenging thing that you've dealt with personally with your particular endeavor with your gyrfalcons and stuff in this breeding project? What's the most challenging thing you've had to deal with?
Probably the most challenging thing was getting a CITES permit. It took over 3 years to do it. And part of that was the person that was in charge of my permit, and evidently, this is put on somebody's desk and then it follows them. This is a young woman that was new to the service, and she was sent on several different details. For instance, once she went to Guam for 6 months to study brown tree snakes. And that's a big problem. They're invasive species. They get on planes and they're invading Guam. But, in those 6 months, my permit was just sitting. I've never really had too many different things because, as I said, I tried to anticipate what problems could be and work around them. So it's been mostly patience and putting in the work to keep things clean. I move 20 tons of gravel twice a year, 10 tons in and 10 tons out. And I've got a nice gravel road, but, it's like many things. If you are careful and do your homework, you can anticipate a lot of problems. Not all of them, but, we're at over 7,000 feet here. So it's a perfect place for gyrfalcons. There's no West Nile here. There's no avian herpes. And I can say West Nile confidently because one of the projects I did was working for the Game and Fish to, actually I didn't do that particular one. I had a technician do it. We sampled hundreds of sites here in the Upper Green for mosquitoes. And while we found lots and lots and lots of mosquitoes, none of them carried the West Nile virus. So at this point in time, before the virus mutates again, this is a safe area. So cold winters, not as cold as the Arctic, but cold, low humidity. Low humidity in the summer, and a normal summer day is 70 to 80. If it hits 90, people are sweating. It's a hot day.
Yeah.
So it was my great good fortune to end up here and have it coincide with my intense love of gyrfalcons.
Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, and I'm sure it's nice, like you said, being able to, if one does meet some unfortunate end while you're hawking and stuff, nice being able to kind of have your own, choice of birds, from birds that you already know and produce. And yeah, you just never know what's going to happen. I know I've heard from a lot of people that the gyr market in particular is definitely, changed a lot, and there's not as much of a demand now as what there used to be. But, I guess, the things change constantly with these different markets. I'm sure that's a big pain to kind of have to deal with the fluctuations and that stuff sometimes too. But
for me, it was never a part of my real income stream. It was things I more just wanted to do because of my interest in the husbandry. But we are in the twilight days of gyrfalcons in North America.
Yeah.
Sage grouse are declining everywhere. There's only 10% of the birds left that originally was on less than 50% of the original habitat. The state of Washington, no sage grouse hunting is allowed there at all. Utah and Idaho, they have long seasons, but you can only kill 2 birds per season. Nevada, I think, has long seasons, but is closed to non-residents. And Wyoming and Montana are the only 2 states with the long seasons that we cherish, and unlimited take. And there will be a time in the not too distant future when that's gone.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. No, well, I guess, I mean, we should probably, before things shift to too dire of a topic, I guess. I mean, I do want, before we start to kind of wrap this up a little bit, I do want to get 1 or 2 of your more memorable, hunting experiences and stuff, or particular fond memories of a particular bird, or, I just want to get at least a couple of good stories, 1 or 2, really, I mean, more of the memorable stories that come to mind for you before we wrap this up, and then, and kind of come close to calling this good. So.
Sure. As probably with most people, my most memorable times are a culmination of the day, where you go out and you leave here in the dark, usually leave home, because even though sage grouse central here and I've got sage grouse on my property, it's not conducive for hawking. And just south of here, 30 miles or so, out on the BLM flats, it could not be better. And so you get out there and the day's just breaking, and it's all quiet because usually what little wind we have, which is not usually very much, comes up in the afternoon, so dawns are usually quiet. And both hawking here and with all my telemetry work, we have in total over 500,000 telemetry location points for sage grouse, and about half of those are here in the Pinedale region, and half of them spread around over the rest of the state. But so I know where the grouse live, and what they do during the day, and so I was able to find grouse, or at least know where to look for them, because in sage grouse hawking, you, of course, as with all things, you follow the natural patterns of the game. And with sage grouse, they're spread out all over in the summer nesting, And then as the fall comes on, they go to riparian areas where there's more mesic vegetation, wet vegetation. Things like dandelions and stuff that when you break them, they have a milky sap that comes out. And so those broods are in the early fall when you start hawking are spread all over. And then as the winter progresses, these broods coalesce into larger and larger flocks gradually. And it's not a response to cold or snow. This is a part of the annual social cycle of the bird. And so by January or February, you've got most of the birds gathered up into big flocks, from 100 to 200 or 300, and I've seen flocks of over 2,000 individuals. And so with all those birds gathered up in the one spot, there's lots of other places where there aren't any birds. So you have to have a big running dog that knows its business and can get out there and use the power of the dog to find the birds. And half of my enjoyment is watching the dogs work, because an experienced dog can send grouse from astonishing distances. A mile is nothing unusual. But, they're standing in the snow with wet feet, and I know falconers that say they can smell grouse. It's like a wet chicken, But, seeing a dog work into a point and planning out things. And I had a really exceptional Brittany that was part of her research team, too. And so instead of just the hawking dog that works 4 or 5 months a year, she would do the hawking, and then in the spring, we would use her to find nests, sage grouse nests, and in the summer, we would use her to find the babies on the broods so we could mark them. So she got like 9 or 10 months a year. And she was so neat in the way she did it, because every dog is different the way it handles grouse. But she would scent grouse. And of course, at this time, she was probably 8 or 9 years old and pointed thousands of birds. And she would go into them in a real deliberate manner and work into them, and, hesitate a little bit and make another wide swing. And then you could see, how her mind was working. She was defining the edges. And then she would go up to a certain point and just stop and lift up her head in a certain way, then ever so slowly in slow motion, just look back over my shoulder, over her shoulder to me, and it was obvious, yep, I got them. They're right here. And sometimes, there'd be half a dozen birds, and sometimes 200. And some of the most memorable flights are when, and of course, you have no idea how many are out there, because they're invisible in the sagebrush. And so you go out and start walking in. And the birds are big, and they flush like any gallinaceous bird, where they rise vertically, then level out with a great sound of wings. But if there's 100 or 500 birds lifting off, it is really a sight to see. And they're not evenly spaced on in a flock like waterfowl often are, but they're in small groups. And so 25 or 40 birds will get up and fly 50 yards or something. They'll fly over another group, and that will induce them to fly. And then wave after wave of birds get up. And it's reminiscent of some of the flights on big waterfowl flocks I've seen, where there's birds all over in the sky, and you're trying to pick out the falcon and see what's going on. And those are memorable days. And then, of course, the other days that stick in my mind are when a bird gets killed, and, you have a great flight, and or even a not so great flight. But one of the things about gyrfalcons is that they love to chase. They will, they can be up high enough where it looks like they can cut a grouse in half, and they come in and tap them on the back, and then lock in behind them and chase until the grouse puts into cover. And these are typically ephemeral draws that have water part of the year, but have additional moisture and food resources for the sage. And there's tall sage, and the grouse go into those. And so the falcon's right behind it. And in the winter, when there's snow on the ground, there's nothing else moving out there. The eagles are watching all day long. That's all they do. And for a pair that may have been together for 15 or 20 years, They know each other as well as any husband and wife, probably better. And it can't be a stretch for a golden eagle to see a slowly moving vehicle with a dog out front to say, here's something to watch. And then, if they see a falcon take off after a grouse and not come out of a draw, they know at the minimum, all they got to do is go over there and show up, and they can flush the grouse off and pirate the meal. Mm-hmm. But it sure seems talking to a lot of people that there's something else going on with gyrfalcons, because a lot of gyrs are killed while on quarry, but they're not eaten. And a lot of us thinking, which I do too, is that golden eagles see gyrfalcons as a competitor, and they're trying to kill them and get them out of their hunting territory. And so it's an even more imperative imperative idea to the eagle that they want to kill that gyrfalcon. I remember one day I was going out. It was January, and I was just getting ready to wrap up because the eagles were coming in, and there'll be eagle danger is ever present, but it varies in intensity. There'll be, some resident pairs around, and then some migrants. And then that can change dramatically in days as more birds come in. And I went out one evening, which I rarely do, and I went to 4 different places, and there were eagles there. And I thought, I just finally gave up and went home, fed the bird a little bit, and went out at dawn the next morning, and it was cold. And I got out there in the dark, went to this smaller valley where the sight lines were limited. The valley was probably 2 miles across or something, but not a long, long distance. And I was just waiting for the light to come up. And I just literally put my hand on the doorknob, and this subadult golden eagle, about 2 or 3 years old, came sweeping by the truck window, powering along about 15 feet off the sage, landed on the top of a sagebrush about 50 yards in front of the truck in a very erect Yarrick stance, looking around, and you could tell that the first thing that moved, that eagle was going to kill it or try to. Because it would, as I said, I've flown a lot of golden eagles, and I could tell from his attitude it was hungry, and it was on a hair trigger. So that was the last day I hunted that year.
Yeah.
Went home and kept my bird. But what I really like to see in hawking, especially since I use gyrfalcons, is that sage grouse are really intimidated with a gyrfalcon directly overhead, and they don't want to fly, and they'll often fly 50 feet or something. When the bird starts coming in, they dump into the sage. And gyrfalcons are kind of like golden eagles, where they like to get up in the air too and fly around some. And so I've always tried to orchestrate flights where the bird is way off to one side, like a quarter mile or more, and up really high, and then flush the grouse, and that so they're not intimidated with the bird right over them. And that way they get up in start moving and start climbing in altitude and get up to a couple 300 feet, and they're moving really fast. And that way the gyrfalcon comes screaming across the sky, and what they really like to do, these long, powerful slant stoops, and then get above the grouse and twist and stoop into them, and you get to see the entire thing up in the air. And the grouse usually don't put in those situations. And with the bird up in the air, the grouse up in the air like that, there's often more of a devastating strike where the bird is brought down and is more crippled or unable to fly, and it limits the tail chasing. So that's how I have kind of come to adopt my falconry techniques to the situation here with what I consider one of the premier quarries for long wings and the gyrfalcons, and try to keep the birds alive and try to set up what I think is the most dramatic flights I've ever seen.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I can imagine that you were probably, pretty eager to go ahead and wrap it up after all those eagle encounters and stuff. I mean, that's pretty hairy stuff. I can only imagine. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same deal anytime you have any kind of near close calls with any bird that you're flying, whether it's a kestrel coming close to getting snatched by a Cooper's hawk or whatever the case is, you're just kind of, ready to just kind of be like, all right, I'm good.
Yeah, it's sage grouse or gyrfalcons and gyrfalcons and golden eagles is no different than any other bird. Yep. It's the bird's the next step up bigger can do the same thing. It can either pirate the quarry or it can kill the other bird.
Yeah. Well, we've already talked about a lot of good stuff, and it's been nice really kind of getting an overview, of your history and how you got into all this. And it sounds like your dog's going to need to be let out again soon and stuff. So we probably need to go ahead and wrap this up. But before we wrap, I want to go ahead and end like I usually do and get a good piece of advice from you that, just from your point of view, what you'd like to leave the current or even prospective future, generations of falconers, and we'll call it good.
Sure. As far as what to look for or for young falconers, I'd say really pursue it. Pursue your falconry with passion while you have the chance before you get wound up in families and have other responsibilities. And if there's a bird that you want to try, if it at all fits in your area and your quarry, then do it. But by the same token, don't get something because you think it's a cool bird if you don't have the places and the quarry to do it. For instance, I've had numerous inquiries from people in areas that I don't consider good for falconry. Like I always ask people, what are your situations like? And I had one guy say, well, it's mostly forested, but I have access to an open area that's 30 acres. And I've got, that's the size of my place here, and a gyrfalcon can't even get really up to speed in 30 acres. And so, be cognizant of the bird that fits your country best. And the old falconry adage of flying your native local birds on your native local quarry is the best thing you can do. If that's sage grouse and gyrfalcons, that's great. If that's sparrowhawks and quail in Italy, that's great. Whatever you can walk out the door and fly every day is what you need to do. While it's romantic and cool to go to someplace in the American West and hunt some kind of sharptails or prairie chickens or grouse, it's without a doubt really neat going and setting up a grouse camp. But if you have to fly to kites and other gizmos and different things for most of the year, hoping for a 2-week vacation, that to me is not a dead end, but it's not the definition of falconry that is at my core, again, of flying your native birds or your local birds on local quarry. And anything you can do to document what you see in a consistent manner is really valuable, because we're seeing the collapse of all kinds of things, different components of our ecosystems. Today, and the first of the week, I made 2 trips to Rock Springs, or 1 trip back and 1 trip down. And I should have seen lots of birds. I saw 1 golden eagle, 1 redtail. And things are, our natural world is collapsing around us. Part of that is neonicotinoid pesticides, where they're applied to grains and other plants for human consumption, but they're a killer of all kinds of insect life, which is the basis of everything else. It's, if you don't have insect life, you don't have little birds. If you don't have little birds, you don't have merlins. Things are collapsing in such a dramatic way. And now in the last few years, we've had the bird flu, and that is ravaging waterfowl populations and raptors. But in fact, I was talking to a good friend of mine on the way up here this morning, is that he's not seeing anything, or very few raptors up around Billings either. And if you don't keep records and be consistent with that, in time you lose your memory. Was it this year or was it that year? And so things like how many red tails you see in a consistent route that you go. In 20 years or so, that could be really valuable information. And the Leopold family was really good about that, of documenting the annual cycle of when birds return, how many you see, those kind of things that are consistent over time, that any falconer can help contribute to scientific knowledge of their area, because they typically know those areas better than anybody else, because a gun hunter doesn't go out as often as a falconer, and you often go to the same places, so you can have the opportunity to really present some good information as long as you're consistent and accurate.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, it's a good piece of advice. I mean, it's always best to stick to what you have, and it's going to be an exercise in futility and a lot of frustration for you and your bird both if you don't, hunt what's regularly available. And yeah, I mean, once again, goes back to that whole square peg, round hole thing. You're just going to, frustrate yourself to no end if you don't have anything readily available. And yeah, it's just not going to be a good situation. So, I mean, it's a good thing to reemphasize. So.
And falconry is difficult enough anyway.
Sure.
And you have to have some successes.
Yeah.
If you go out day after day and something doesn't work or whatever, it soon becomes futile and disappointing, and it's easier to drop it. So try to maximize your success, both for your enjoyment of the day and to keep at it long term, because like so many things, the longer you do it and the more experience you get, the better you get at it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And, like I said, it's always good to make sure that, you're having fun. And if you're going to be constantly spinning wheels, you're not going to be having fun. But yeah. So anyway, well, I think it's a good point to go ahead and wrap this up. You need to let that poor dog out and run around a little bit and stuff. And it's all good. I'm going to probably head out here shortly anyway, but I want to say thank you again for letting me into your place and, having a nice conversation with you. And thanks for being willing to, share some of your history. And, like I said, it's always nice hearing, how people have had really diverse backgrounds, especially ones like yourself. It sounds like you've had a pretty interesting life. So
I have. I've been fortunate. There were times when I didn't think I was that fortunate, but it's been very satisfying in a lot of different ways, and a lot of it was due to my science background and pursuing the science part of it. But I guess in closing, I would say, just for young falconers or any falconer that's looking at it, just follow your passion, but be reasonable and go after it correctly and hard, and take good care of your birds, perfect equipment, all those kind of things that lead up to having the bird in the field at its peak performance and peak physical condition. So when you do when everything comes together with your dog and your hawk and the day and everything else, is that the bird can perform and be ready to witness, unbelievable things that people, no matter how ardent a bird watcher you are, most people never get to see the things that we get to see every time we go out.
Very true. Very true. Well, I think that's the perfect note to end on. And like I said, thank you again. Hopefully we'll get to do this again some other time. And, like I said, I mean, I'm appreciative of your time and for having me out. So I'm glad we could do this.
My pleasure. Yeah, I hope that somebody can get something out of this. I don't know how long we've been talking, but I don't know how many people would listen to the end.
Well, it's all good. No, it's we're just under an hour and a half, and like I said, I'm sure people will find it enjoyable, and yeah, no, I mean, there's always something that everyone has to offer, and like I said, I appreciate you sharing your stuff, and yeah, we'll go ahead and call this good, and hopefully we can do it again some other time. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate your effort in seeking out people. There's some wonderful people in falconry that have unbelievably diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, hopefully I'll get to as many of them as I can. I'm doing my best. So.
You bet.
All right. Thanks, John.
You bet.